Ladies and gentlemen, I am Lucas, a student from Higher Diploma in Furniture and Lifestyle Product Design program here at HKDI and 𝐈 𝐸.
I am Ivy, a student from Higher Diploma in Landscape Design program. We will be your MCs today.
On behalf of Hong Kong Design Institute and HKDI Gallery, we would like to welcome you all to today's master lecture, Waste Age, What Can Design Do?
Waste Age, What Can Design Do? Marks the first collaboration of HKDI Gallery and Design Museum from London. It is a thought-provoking exhibition demonstrating the current crisis and what is the role of design in tackling the critical problem of waste and its environmental consequences across the world.
To kick off the event, we are pleased to have Mr. Justin McGurk, Chief Curator at the Design Museum from London, to tell us more about the creation and development of the exhibition, as well as its impact to Design Museum London. Let's welcome Mr. McGurk.
Well, hello. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's very sweet of you to call this the Master's Lecture, but I promise you I'm a beginner. But I'm very glad that this show has come to Hong Kong. It was an important show for us at the Design Museum, and I think it was really the beginning of a whole process that's now underway at the museum in terms of rethinking both our own operation and trying to understand how we can embed sustainable thinking at the heart of everything that we do, really. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the exhibition and some of the ideas that run through it. It started in London in the autumn of 2021. We opened it in conjunction with the COP26 climate conference that was in Glasgow that year. And it was our contribution to that debate at the time. And we had spent a few years thinking about how we could do an exhibition about design and the environment, specifically design and the environmental crisis, let's say. And we talk a lot about the climate crisis, and that is a crisis of emissions, if you like, atmospheric emissions. And that's something that design can affect, but it's a bigger project. Whereas when it comes to waste, that's something that design has a very close relationship to. Design has been instrumental in producing the throwaway culture that we have today, and design will be instrumental in addressing that problem. So the exhibition looks at the nature of the society that we've created, which we called the take, make, waste economy, whereby things have very short use value lives, and then they become waste. And it thinks about how design really needs to reinvent itself or rethink itself to address this problem. And it looks at the way that dozens of designers in the exhibition, but hundreds of designers around the world, are reassessing their practice and trying to reinvent themselves, really, in their practices so that they can address the problem, either through research or through advocacy or through experimentation or through actual industrial processes. And there's no shortage of high-profile spokespeople on this topic. You know, in the build-up to the exhibition, we had people like David Attenborough saying, "Stop waste. You know, stop waste of any kind." He was basically saying waste is the key thing that we need to address as a society. And he says, "Celebrate and cherish." And waste is, in many ways, a conceptual problem. Buckminster Fuller said it quite well when he said pollution is nothing but resources we're not harvesting because we don't understand their value. So part of the exhibition is about understanding the value of our waste, not just so that we can recycle it, but so that we can produce less waste. But what was important for me was doing an exhibition about waste in a major cultural institution in London. It was quite a bold move, in a way. I mean, given that exhibitions are always trying to pull in large audiences, and large audiences have a lot of competition for their attention. They can go and see a David Hockney show or an art show at a major museum, or they can, on their weekend, or they can come and see a show about waste. You know, what would you choose if you could only do one of those things? But for me, the reason why it's so important is because we think of waste, or rather we don't think of waste, I suppose is the problem. We tend to not want to think about it, not want to see it, not want to talk about it, not want to deal with it. It's generally, we prefer it out of sight and out of mind. And that is the problem, that waste has always been a marginal issue, something that happens on the peripheries. It's certainly where we send our waste, to the peripheries. I don't just mean the periphery of London or the periphery of Hong Kong. I mean global peripheries. So we send our waste to Ghana or to China. Often the UK was sending its waste to China or to Africa, you know, places that, other places, as long as it's not here, as long as it's somewhere else. So for me, it was very important to make waste central to the conversation about design, to embrace it, to understand it, to talk about it, because it's only by understanding it that we can change our design processes, our manufacturing processes, our behaviors. So we've always thought of waste as an externality, an unavoidable product of industrial processes. But it's not an externality, it's an internality. It's internal to capitalism, it's internal to our society, it's important for growth. Growth is founded on waste. We're encouraged to waste so that we can buy more, so that we can have more growth. So it's central, it's central. And when I say it's an internality, it's in us. You know, there's plastic in us, in you. There's plastic in fish in the sea. There's plastic in amoeba, you know, deep in the ocean. So there's no, you know, we've more or less fused. Nature and waste have fused. We're the same thing. The exhibition has 3 themes. We start with the problem, which we called peak waste, and it's really an introduction to the show, trying to help confront the visitor with the nature of the problem and the scale of the problem. And then we move on to precious waste, which looks at recycling and reuse and the circular economy. And then we move on to post-waste, which is a more future-focused section about how we can design our way past the waste problem and produce a low-waste future. And then I'll say a few words again at the end about what I'm calling the waste age effect, which is what it has helped stimulate within the Design Museum itself. So, grasping the scale of the crisis, we've all seen images like this, and in the London exhibition we had several of Ed Bertinsky's incredible photographs of waste landscapes, and they are a kind of sublime. It's not so much that they're beautiful, but in the traditional meaning of sublime, meaning kind of fearful, full of awe. The scale of these waste sites are awesome. And we talk a lot about the Anthropocene. I don't know if that's a word you use, but in the UK and in the English-speaking world, we talk about the Anthropocene, which is the age of climate change, effectively, the age we live in now. And the Anthropocene is a term from geology. And so the first item, the first object in the show is a series of rocks. They look like rocks, but they're actually rocks fused with plastic. And the technical term for these is plastiglomerate. And so really it's an interesting symbol of how, as I said before, waste and nature have now fused. And since Anthropocene is a geological term, this is the nature of the next layer, the next geological layer is made of our waste. And the waste industry itself is interestingly inefficient and generates a lot of carbon emissions, because I said that countries like the UK tend to ship their waste around the world. This is an interesting project from MIT where they put trackers in pieces of waste and then they followed where they went. And you can see that we're shipping our waste across the oceans. We're shipping it, you know, to the Far East, to Africa. This is only one set of waste. It's not a global picture. It's just really a few items. But it gives a sense of how crazy that is, that we generate this waste and then we start shipping it around the world. And so in the show, one of the first things you encounter is a timeline that starts in the 1700s and runs until today. And what's interesting about this timeline is that waste, as we know it today, is a very new concept. You know, humanity has been around for tens of thousands of years, 100,000 years even, but it really, waste begins in the 18th century. Britain loves to remind everybody that we invented the Industrial Revolution. Actually, we invented waste, because the Industrial Revolution is when waste, on the scale we understand it today, really begins through the byproducts of industrial production. So we chart that journey, and waste really takes off after the Second World War, which I'll get to in a second. So after the Second World War, with the rise of the consumer society and convenience culture and the emergence of amazing new materials, cheap new materials like plastic, suddenly a whole new culture emerges, and we are encouraged to waste things. We're encouraged by advertising to throw things away. And what's interesting about this is that people had to learn that. It wasn't a natural pattern of behavior. In the beginning, people would keep their plastic bags and things because they felt that they were valuable, you know. But they were taught through millions and millions of dollars worth of advertising and you know, lobbying to throw that stuff away, embrace the fact that you don't have to wash up your plates and stuff. Just throw it all away. It's fine. It's better. It's easier. It's quicker, more efficient. So that became a human pattern, but we had to learn it. We were taught it. We were indoctrinated, effectively. So I mentioned that our waste goes to places like Ghana, and until recently, the biggest e-waste dump in the world was in Ghana. It was called Agbogbloshie. And it was an extraordinary place where, you know, global e-waste kind of accumulated, and then locals would pick over it and try and recycle as much of the materials as possible, often in really toxic ways, by like burning plastic wires to burn the plastic off so you could get the copper out. So this is Ibrahim Mahama's hand. He's holding some of the copper extracted from these electronics. And we wanted a piece that reflected Agbogbloshie. So we asked Ibrahim, he's a major Ghanaian artist called Ibrahim Mahama. And he created a piece for us which used 40 televisions that he found in the waste dump. And he used them to show a series of films about the labor that happens there and the very manual way that they take hammers and they break the computers and the televisions and they pull out the parts and then they melt them down. And so he made this piece, and it contains these frames which he melted down from the metals from the electronics. So he put these frames around the TV screens. And it was quite a powerful piece. And in fact, you know, he shipped it to the UK, and when these TVs arrived, they didn't work. They were all broken because the export authority in Ghana you're not allowed to ship waste back to the UK. So, and he didn't know that. So he put it in a shipping container, and the export authority in Ghana went in and they broke all the TVs, so they couldn't work. So you couldn't resell them. That was what was interesting about the piece, is that it revealed something about the global trade in waste that we didn't know. We didn't know you couldn't ship them back. So that was interesting. We had to fix them all to make them work. So that's by way of an introduction to the theme. So the second section is called Precious Waste. And this is really about the way we're handling waste now, which is recycling, reuse, trying to understand materials. It's not, I was always a bit nervous that people would think this was an exhibition about recycling. It's not an exhibition about recycling, and we don't think recycling is the future. We don't think recycling is the answer, actually, because recycling justifies more production of virgin plastic, because there's this idea that somehow it's going to be recycled. It's not going to be recycled. Only a small percentage of your plastic, and in the UK our plastic, gets recycled. So really we just have to stop producing disposable plastic. That's the answer, not getting better. We have to get better at recycling, but recycling is not the answer to the problem. Stopping single-use plastic is the answer to the problem. So it's a section about the circular economy, and it presents the work of designers who are really working as material researchers, studying waste streams, studying what's in products. One of the problems is that our products are so complex now, and they contain so many different kinds of materials, and they're joined in such awkward ways that they can't be recycled. Well, people don't even understand what's in them half the time. So they're doing research. And this is what you're looking at here is a Volkswagen Beetle. So these are all the materials that go into a Volkswagen Beetle. It's a big piece. It's about the same size as this stage, or half the stage. We couldn't bring it here, unfortunately, but we have some other pieces by this practice, Studio Drift. So research is at the key, is a key part of how we're going to get out of this situation. Recycling is another key part, and there are a lot of designers thinking about how to recycle plastics into new products, how to create local community-based recycling machines, like you've got on the top left there, so that recycling doesn't always have to be at the industrial scale, but can also be at the local scale. Designers like Studio Swine, using recycling to tell stories. So the top left is a chair made from sea plastic, which is really in the interest of telling a story. But on the bottom right is a chair made from sea plastic, which is industrial. That's by the architect Snohetta. So there's an industrial scale to that piece. And you can see some of this was from the London exhibition. We had a whole display just about the different ways that you can recycle plastic into new products, be it chairs or sneakers. So that is really kind of reclaiming the plastic, getting it out of the system. And architecture has a huge role to play here, because you can recycle buildings as well. And this is the work of Lacaton and Vassal, the French architects, and they've been absolutely key to the discourse, in my view, because their position is never demolish, because demolition is just pure waste. You're wasting all the embodied carbon, the embodied energy that went into making that building if you demolish it. So here's an example of a housing estate in France. The city wanted to demolish the housing estate, and Lacaton and Vassal said, don't demolish it, just expand it, make it bigger, build these glass balconies onto the facades so that residents have more space and the building has more insulation. And there were many of these blocks. This is just one of them, but there were several of these blocks across the estate. So the city saved millions of euros not having to demolish, not having to rebuild. They saved millions of tons of wasted carbon, which they would have lost when they demolished, and created when they built new buildings. The residents were happy. They didn't even have to move the residents out when they did this. They just plugged the balconies onto the facade. It looked better, it behaved better. And I think that's how architects need to start thinking more and more, is reusing buildings, adapting them. This is a local example from Hong Kong by the architect Don Holohan, and he's also reusing waste materials. In this case, waste timber that he came across, and he's been using, with his students, robotic techniques for carving and shaping these into columns, so architectural columns, they're beautiful. They're in the exhibition. And thanks to my friend Joshua Bolshover for drawing my attention to it. Another important practice is based in Belgium, Rotor. Rotor are interesting because they're architects, but they reinvented themselves as a kind of salvage company. So they get all the construction material. If a building is being renovated or, God forbid, demolished, they take as much of the materials as they can and they make it available online so that it can all be reused. And they're masters of reusing these materials. And there's so much valuable materials that get chucked, sent to landfill from these buildings. And then fashion, it's the second biggest polluting industry in the world, fashion. Not many people know that, but fashion is a terrible polluter because of dyeing and industrial processes and waste, the amount of waste that comes from fast fashion. So there's several fashion designers in the exhibition as well thinking about using recycled textiles and even recycling waste clothes themselves. And here's a picture from London, but some of these pieces are in the show here as well. The two at the front are by Stella McCartney, so you've got recycled sea plastic on the left and a non-toxic fake fur on the right. And the final section is called post-waste. And this is about imagining a future beyond waste, so a kind of post-waste society, if you like. And how are we going to achieve that? Firstly, it's going to be by largely moving past or moving beyond the materials that built the 20th century. That's plastic, steel, concrete, the materials that have defined almost everything that we do and use and live in. We need to move beyond them for a number of reasons, carbon and pollution being the most obvious ones. So it's really, this section has more of a kind of laboratory feel. It's full of experimentation with new materials, and specifically with organic materials. So materials that can be grown, and the materials that if they are wasted or if they are used up, they just go back into the earth because they come from, natural materials like algae, mushrooms, it could be agricultural waste. So there are some implications for architecture and 3D printing with earth and so on. And we wanted to 3D print the walls in the gallery out of earth, but that became too complicated. So we used unbaked clay bricks in the London exhibition. And if they're unbaked, of course, they have less carbon emissions than baked bricks. But you can see a section of the show from London which has kind of examples of these vases and bottles and cups 3D printed out of algae. So you can use algae to make objects. You can use algae to make dresses. You can use mycelium to make structural columns. I mean, you can use mycelium to make... Mycelium, by the way, is mushroom roots. So the network of roots that sustain mushrooms, it's a kind of material full of promise. You can make leather handbags out of it, or you can make structural columns out of it. But it's just a prototype. It's not... I mean, no one's saying that the architecture of the future will be built of mycelium, but people are experimenting with these ideas. This is a dyeing project by Natsai Audrey Chiesa, and she's experimenting with bacterial dyeing because dyeing is the thing that is actually most toxic about fashion. So if you can use bacterial dyes, you can reduce the amount of water. But you're working with living organisms. You can't control them. You don't know. You can't necessarily define what the final pattern is going to be. And that's, I think, one of the things we're going to have to get used to in the 21st century is working with materials that we can't control because they're alive. You're working with bacteria. You're not doing something to the bacteria. And that's a very interesting shift in the design mentality or methodology, is that you can't produce a million things exactly the same if you're going to be working like this. You have to allow for change. Electronics, a huge, e-waste is a huge problem that we need to address. So there are things in the show like organic circuit boards, again, packaging, a huge problem. So there are objects like this onboard meal kit. So every time you take a flight where they serve you a meal, you're generating about 1 kilo of plastic per passenger, which is pure waste. So everything in that meal tray is either reusable or edible or biodegradable. So it's made of coffee grounds or coconut husk or paper. E-waste, I said, is a huge issue. And the huge issue is that these things are not made to last. And they're full of precious metals and valuable material. Some people think that by the middle of this century or by late this century, most of the metals we need will just be in circulation. You won't need to go into the ground for it. So people talk about above-ground mining, which means mining the stuff that's already in all our technology. So for instance, 7% of the world's gold supplies are trapped in our technology, little microchips. So there's tremendous value being lost because you know, laptops are unfixable. Whereas if you look at the framework laptop on the right, every element is designed to be modular and replaceable. So a camera, a memory card, a battery, a screen, any unit can be taken out and replaced. That's exactly what Apple doesn't want you to do, right? Because they're using special screws and glues. They just want you to throw it away, so you buy a new one. Same with toasters. A toaster is a very simple object. You know, it really shouldn't be breaking after 3-5 years. And if it does break, it's too expensive to fix it. There's nowhere to fix it. You have to buy a new one. It's cheaper to buy a new one. Here's a toaster called the Optimist by the Agency of Design, which is designed to last forever. Again, it's not an industry-ready. It's a provocation. It's not a real product. But they're saying things should last longer and they should be fixable. And finally, there's an element in the show which is about rediscovering ancient wisdom. And one good example is this, the East Kolkata wetlands. So outside of Calcutta, there's this wetland fishery. And they were pumping the city's sewage into this water zone. And the way it's built, the way that it's structured, the sewage gets filtered naturally through a sequence of different pools. And it sounds toxic, but it's actually very natural, and it fertilizes this fishing grounds. And they found that actually instead of it damaging the fishery, actually the fish yield went up. And so it's a natural water cleansing system and sewage cleansing system that was using an ancient technique that had been revived. Whereas, you know, if you build a modern sewage treatment plant, it can't deal with this level of sewage. It just can't, and it's kind of toxic, whereas this is all natural. So some of the thoughts that underlie this exhibition, and a quick word about the exhibition design. We know that exhibitions are very wasteful things. You generate a lot of walls and plinths and cases and hoods, and often you can't reuse them, so you throw them away. So we said to the exhibition designers, design a zero-waste exhibition. And we were inspired a little bit by this installation that Alejandro Aravena made at the Venice Biennale in 2016, where he reused, not in a useful way, but in a demonstrative way, a lot of the material that was wasted from the previous Biennale. And so we said to the designers, material cultures, reuse as much as you can from the previous exhibition, but design everything else in a low-waste way. And they came up with a palette of materials which were natural, low-carbon, and reusable. So things like timber frames, wood wool, unbaked clay bricks, and a lot of silicate blocks that were used from a previous exhibition. And the graphic design was interesting because normally you have to generate things like panels and vinyl, which is plastic, which you stick on the wall and then you peel it off. It's pure waste. So they used this 3D printing gun, and they just printed directly onto the walls. There was no waste, which was a game changer for us at the museum. And then afterwards, we found homes for most of the materials. So the hoods went to different exhibition venues. The bricks went to, and a lot of the construction materials were donated to construction companies. So we tried to create a zero-waste exhibition. It didn't quite work because some of the people who were supposed to, like one venue, was supposed to take some stuff and they didn't take it in the end because they realized they had to pay for transport. So it makes you realize that working like this is extra work. It's a challenge for people, but we learned a lot through doing that, and we almost succeeded. But the big stuff that happened out of this was we commissioned an environmental audit. So we asked a company called 𝐷 to audit the exhibition, tell us how much carbon we generated. They did all the studies. They figured out that we used about, well, it was actually more than that in the end, but their initial calculations were about 10 tons of CO2. It wasn't so bad because the museum runs on renewable energy, so that was the biggest thing we could have changed, but that was already positive. So the biggest impact actually came from screws, metal screws, because there were 4,800 stainless steel decking screws to hold the timber frame together. I would never have thought that screws were such a environmental, were such a kind of high carbon material, but they are. And we counted all the emails and all the video calls just to try and understand what an exhibition costs. And now I think about objects differently. I think, how many emails is that object worth? But the biggest thing to come out of it was a new program at the Design Museum called Future Observatory. And it's a new national program for design research supporting the green transition. And it's based at the Design Museum. It's funded by the UK government. And over the next 3 years, or over 3 years, we have £25 million from the government to invest in design research. So that could be research into reducing waste in the fashion industry, reducing carbon in the construction industry, any design project that can support, that can research how to reduce carbon, reduce waste, or have a positive social environmental impact, we can fund. And that's really interesting because it changes the role of a museum. The traditional role of the museum is to enlighten, to educate, to raise awareness, to hold exhibitions about topics like waste. But this really takes it to a next level where we can actually fund the research that will drive change and create a better, cleaner future. So do keep an eye on it if you're interested, futureobservatory.org. We've got 2.5 years more to demonstrate what we can do with that project. And that is probably a good place to end. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McGurk, for your sharing.
We will now open the floor for Q&A section. Shall you have any questions? Please let us see your hand.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for being here, and I want to ask that how can design inspire or help the general public to work harder for the less wasteful world?
Thank you. Actually, that's a very good point. Thank you for raising it. Because there's a lot of emphasis on what the public should be doing. And it's true that the public should be doing a lot better. But I think it's wrong to place the emphasis on the public. Because actually the public has very few good choices to make when it comes to reducing their waste. It's not that they can't be more conscientious about it, because they can and they must. But there's a lot of noise coming from industry about consumer behavior, as if we're the problem. But actually, we've been force-fed this system, and we're, if you want to buy sustainable toothpaste without packaging, what would you do? There's no good solution to that. And, it's not your fault that the recycling systems in Hong Kong aren't there to support you. It's not my fault that in London, some of the stuff that we think is being recycled is being shipped to Turkey to be burned. The systems aren't there. The recycling system is broken. it's not the consumer's fault. The consumer can make a difference by demanding change, but I think governments have to take more responsibility. They have to ban simple things to ban, like single-use plastics. Certain kinds of packaging, just like polystyrene, just shouldn't be in use. Governments need to take responsibility for that, otherwise industry won't change. And industry will always blame the consumer, but it's not the consumer's fault. So we need to look upstream from the consumer. Most waste happens before you even buy the product. Like if you buy an iPhone or a smartphone, 80% of the waste associated with that product has already happened. Whatever you do with it afterwards, the waste has already happened. So manufacturers, designers, governments, they need to take more responsibility. Citizens do too, but there's a limited amount that they can do on their own.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm looking forward to see the show. I'm just wondering, because our economy thrives from producing new things, creating desires to buy them, and also, you know, this idea that we need to replace things. Our economy is thriving on that, and it seems that, you know, the problems that you've introduced are more systems level. How do you think design or designers can contribute to this systems level change?
Well, you just asked the question of the century. That's the question. I mean, the problem is, as you said, and as I said at the beginning of the talk, that our economic model, our economic system is built on waste. It demands waste. It requires waste, because without, you can't have growth if you don't have waste. So that is the system that we need to unpick, and that is an economic, philosophical, and political question. A lot of people now talk about degrowth. I'm not an economic expert, so I can't tell you if that's the answer, or if it's green growth or degrowth. I can't tell you categorically, but we need to start addressing that question of whether it makes sense to build an economy that requires us to constantly buy and replace things. What can designers do about it? Well, designers, unfortunately, are often working within the system. So it's quite rare for them to have the agency to be able to tackle the bigger questions. Most often it's, you know, how do you replace a plastic coffee cup lid with an algae coffee cup lid? It's not, why do we have a takeaway coffee? You know, so I think they can make a difference with things like whether or not to have a takeaway coffee. But, you know, once you've had a century of people having takeaway coffee, it's quite difficult to go back to the Italian model of drinking it from a ceramic cup at a zinc bar, you know, which is a nicer way to do it.
Thank you, Justin. The sharing is very inspiring. You mentioned that the government does have a very important role to play. So similar to the UK, Hong Kong is going to ban the styrofoam lunchbox, for instance, in the coming years. I have two questions. One is that, compared with the carbon emissions, waste problem is a global challenge. And to combat climate change globally, for the Glasgow COP conference, that economies are going to set the targets towards carbon neutrality. So I'm saying that to decarbonize, apparently globally, the pathway is getting clearer. Certainly the target and the reality could be different, but still, there are many targets. For instance, Hong Kong has already peaked the carbon emissions in 2014, 8 or 9 years ago, and going to reach carbon neutrality before 2050. And for mainland China, they would like to peak before 2030. That means within 10 years, and then to become carbon neutral before 2060. My question is that on waste, how would you foresee the pathway? That could be more challenging and complicated. That's number one. Second is that there are many student designers here. Do you have any good message to them? You're saying that the system is the issue. And the government is the key players. But you know, there are many young people here, so I probably would like to hear from you. What would be your message or advice to the teachers and students here? Thank you, Justin.
Good questions. Well, the pathway, I can't lay out the pathway because I don't actually know. But I'm part of a group in London called the Exhibition Road Cultural Group. So it's all the museums in Kensington. And we're working together to, it's the first time those 21 institutions are actually working together. Normally we're competing against each other, actually. So we're working together to try and figure out how we can be a collective group to reduce emissions, reduce waste, improve green transport. So even the fact that we're doing that suggests that there's a real collective will now to make a difference and to learn from each other. So that's, you know, really interesting, and our contribution to that is based on WasteAge. We designed, we created a low environmental impact design guide, so we're going to share that with all the institutions. It's maybe a small example, but it does suggest that things are starting to turn. And then on the message for the designers in the room, I think one of the, I hope that you find the exhibition optimistic and kind of positive, because it starts in quite a heavy place, but it takes you through a series of ideas that really communicate one thing, which is that it's not just that we have to change, it's that the change is already happening. We're in the change. It's changing. You know, you just gave us some good examples of what the Hong Kong government's going to do. You know, we need more, it needs to happen faster, but it is happening, and I'm convinced that we will get there. I just don't know when or how long it will take.
Since there are no more questions, maybe Mr. McGuirk, would you have any more sharing?
No, but you've been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McGuirk, and everyone for such a remarkable sharing. Once again, thank you all for coming and sharing with us. We would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the opening ceremony for the exhibition at the d-mart tonight.
For online delegates, if you wish to visit the exhibition, please scan the QR code from the screen now to be booked for your visit. The exhibition will start from now until 7th of May this year. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you soon.